The venerable Humvee has long been an icon of America's modern wars, a squat, diesel-powered, do-it-all machine that went everywhere US troops went. From Desert Storm to Baghdad to the mountains of Afghanistan, it was the ride of choice for infantry squads, commanders, and supply crews alike. But its boxy frame carried a hidden flaw. It was never meant to survive the battlefields it was thrown into. Flat floors and thin skin made it tragically vulnerable to roadside bombs, ambushes, and the brutal realities of 21st century insurgent warfare. The quick fixes came first: bolt-on armor kits, up-armored variants, and eventually the massive MRAPs designed to shrug off explosions that would have turned a Humvee into scrap. Yet MRAPs lumbered under their own bulk, trading mobility for survivability. What America's soldiers needed was something in between, a vehicle as tough as an MRAP and as nimble as a Humvee. Enter the JLTV, the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. After years of design battles, court fights, and billions in investment, it emerged as something no US light truck had ever been before. Let's look into it. Historical context and development. The JLTV's pedigree goes really far back, right the way back to the World War II era truck quarter-ton 4x4 command reconnaissance, better and more succinctly remembered as the Jeep. It hauled ammo, laid wire, ferried wounded, scouted ahead, and did all of it with no doors, usually. It also barely had a nod at comfort, a simple and reliable utility runabout that prized mobility and ubiquity over protection. Through Korea and Vietnam, the basic formula held, with the successive M38 and M151 variants still being open-topped, lightly built, and expected to live just behind the gun line, not to duel with it. Even the heavier trucks of the era, such as the GMC CCKW and later the M35, followed the same logic: payload and cross-country chops first, armor not required. After all, such vehicles didn't fight, they supported those who did. Come the 1970s, however, the Army was starting to rethink that logic, and thus, in 1985, came the high-mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicle, commonly known as the Humvee. It was bigger, it was diesel-powered, and it was much more versatile, designed as a fast, go-anywhere platform for dozens of roles, be it troop carrier, weapons carrier, shelter hauler, ambulance, or command post on wheels. Just pick your box, bolt it on, and drive away. What it was not, however, was a miniature tank. The original requirement treated armor as a limited, mission-dependent option. It had run flats and tough fuel tanks, but nothing meant for shrugging off large mines or roadside bombs. And that made sense in Cold War doctrine, as it was still the assumption that such vehicles would be scurrying behind in support, not getting stuck into the action. And then came 9/11 and its subsequent wars. Very different affairs that rendered that past assumption totally moot. Now IEDs could be anywhere, and every alleyway could play host to a well-coordinated ambush. Safety anywhere in theater could no longer be assumed. The first responses were perhaps unsurprisingly quick ones. Bolt-on kits like the Armor Survivability Kit was soon being produced, and dedicated up-armored variants like the M1151 Enhanced Armored Carrier soon followed. And they helped for sure, but the Humvee's fundamental design was ultimately flawed. Its flat floor and low mass would always give blasts an easy path, and explosively formed penetrators, save for the really shit ones, didn't give a toss about its new armor. Then enter the mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, or MRAP, to take up the slack, a vehicle type that came with tall stances and V-shaped hulls to kick blast energy away from their crews. The Pentagon fast-tracked their development from 2007, and soon enough models like the Cayman and Max Pro started making their appearances. But such vehicles came at a price, as with many coming in at 15 to 20 tons, and sometimes even more, they weren't exactly what you would call nimble. Fantastic for security, fantastic for convoy work, yes, but when trails got narrow, roads turned bumpy, and bridges became rickety, well, they were going to struggle. They're 15 to 20 tons. The fix was a lighter MRAP, the Oshkosh MATV, arriving around 2009 with independent suspension and better off-road manners. It was still a 12.5 to 15-ton beast once kitted out, and while it could clamber where the big rigs bogged, it was hardly the nimble heir to the Jeep. Thus, the American light truck lineage had found itself at a bit of an awkward fork. On the one branch, the Humvee, nimble, modular, everywhere, but born of an era when good blast protection was distance. And on the other, the MRAP, survivable, towering, and heavy, a specialist that kept people alive, but meant logistical planners were pulling their hair out. And that's where the subject of today's episode, the JLTV, comes into the story, as the successor of that first branch of the tree. The JLTV program. The JLTV's story proper begins in November 2006 when the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, that's a group of top US military leaders who decide what weapons, vehicles, and systems the armed forces actually needs, gave the formal nod to begin development. Development is quite the abstract term this early on, though. Basically, what it amounted to was drawing up a wish list: lighter than a MRAP, tougher than a Humvee, fast enough to keep up with mechanized units, reliable, and finally, that most rare and elusive of qualities in military material: not too expensive. Now, the actual spec list was, of course, a lot more long-winded than that, and it took until December 2007 to be finalized, at which point the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology and Logistics, John Young Jr., gave it a once-over, found it all perfectly agreeable, and moved the effort into the technology development stage in February 2008, that being the one where the Pentagon pays industry to experiment, prototype, and prove ideas before anything is built in large numbers. Initial tenders came in from far and wide, but come October 2008, only 3 were chosen to move forward: Lockheed Martin, General Tactical Vehicles, and a partnership between BAE Systems and Navistar. Interestingly, this caused many tantrums within the military-industrial complex, as 2 of the losing bidders, a Boeing and Textron bid and another by Northrop Grumman and Oshkosh, filed protests with the Government Accountability Office, claiming that the military had botched the evaluation process. Said tantrums were legally quashed in February of the following year, though. From there, the prototypes started rolling in, with Lockheed Martin submitting this, General Tactical Vehicles submitting this, and BAE Systems Navistar presenting this. Soon, however, problems started to arise. These early designs satisfied the light part of the brief easy enough, but the blast-resistant part less so. The lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan would not budge. If you want crews to climb out after a roadside bomb, you need underbody protection in the MRAP class. No ifs, no buts, an attitude that saw the requirement hardened in early 2011. Now it was no longer MRAP-like, but MRAP-level. Period. So radical was the change, in fact, that a whole new tendering process was begun in January 2012, and over the next 2 years, dozens of prototypes from a myriad of manufacturers, mostly the ones we earlier discussed, would be rolled out onto ranges, blown up again and again. When it came time to make a final decision in August 2015 who should end up winning, Lockheed Martin threw a bit of a tantrum and lodged a complaint not only with the Government Accountability Office, but also took the military to federal claims court, forcing the Army to slap a stop work order on the whole project while they defended themselves. This took until February 2016 to sort out, when the court declined to see things Lockheed Martin's way, and they formally withdrew from development in protest. Not that that actually meant anything at that point anyway, since the military already knew who it wanted to go with, and was only keeping its options open just in case. And from there, finally, production, with the first low-rate orders being submitted in spring, which began being delivered in autumn. Service, however, was still a long way away, as there was yet more testing to be done. And this is a good point for us to slam the brakes on the narrative side of today's story, because before we progress any further, we really should familiarize ourselves with what Oshkosh's winning JLTV design, referred to in-house as the Light Combat Tactical All-Terrain Vehicle, or LATV, actually is. Technical overview and vehicle specifications. When you first put your eyes on a JLTV, it doesn't look really all that different from the Humvee that it's going to be replacing. Sure, it's a bit taller, a bit more angular, and altogether a bit more beefy looking, but if you had to describe them both down the phone, you would be using the same words, wouldn't you? But start peeling back the layers, and you soon realize that the JLTV isn't just an evolution of that old World War II-born formula, it is a total reinvention. Something designed from the ground up to do something no other light vehicle in the US's infantry could pull off: to take a mine blast to its belly and then still keep up with a Bradley. It's a whole series of vehicles based off a common base too, much like the Striker that we looked at in a previous video, with there being 4 different variants upon which specific situational gear, so-called mission package configurations, is then placed, with variants being the JLTV UTL utility variant, the JLTV CCWC Close Combat Weapon Center variant, the JLTV GP General Purpose variant. As for the configurations, there's 4 that you need to know about. The M1278 heavy weapons carrier, which carries either a 5-man crew when fitted with an open-top turret or a 4-man crew when fitted with a remote weapon system. Remote or hand-operated, however, the weapons fitted remain the same, usually an M250 cal machine gun or an MK19 automatic grenade launcher. The M1279 utility, which only allows a crew of 2 but uses the space freed up therefrom to accommodate payloads of up to 5,100 pounds. The M1280 general purpose, the base model that carries a 4-man crew, can take a 3,500 pound payload. The M1281 close combat weapons carrier, it has a 5-man crew, and in stark contrast to what the name suggests, it carries the big shooty stuff that hits targets far away. Your TOW missiles, your Sabre missiles, things like that. And to help keep whoever has their finger on the aforementioned triggers alive, it also sports the TOW Objective Gunner Protection Kit, which comes with thick armor protection and a few gadgets for increasing situational awareness without overly straining the suspension. Between them, they cover everything from squad taxi to mobile anti-armor platform, but like we said, they share most of their bones. The same chassis, the same drivetrain, the very same suspension. And this was a very deliberate move too. Find one of the 5 Wehrmacht veterans still knocking around in old folks' homes, ask them about the absolute joy they had trying to supply parts to the million or so different types of vehicles they used, and you'll soon find out why. Moving on from thinking about just variants, however, and instead getting into design specifics, we of course know that the JLTV was all about mobility, specifically mobility tied up in a handy little still being alive after driving over a mine package. So, how'd they achieve that? Well, partly it was through the snappily named Oshkosh TAC-4 independent suspension system. This, as with all independent suspension arrangements in fairness, is a setup where each wheel can move up and down on its own without forcing the wheel on the other side of the axle to move with it, and in the TAC-4 system it comes with 16 inches of travel in each wheel, meaning that the tires can stay planted on uneven ground, maintaining traction instead of spinning uselessly in the air, as can often be the case for a fixed axle vehicle. Then throw in plenty of torquey pushing power thanks to a 400 horsepower rated 6.6 litre diesel V8, 4-wheel drive, meaning that if one of those 2 tires loses grip on mud, sand or rocks, the others can still push or pull the vehicle forward, and a cab that can be raised and lowered at will to squeeze a few more inches of ground clearance out, and what you've got is a vehicle with some serious off-road capabilities. In fact, Oshkosh themselves claim that the JLTV is 70% faster off-road than today's gold standard, and given the lack of whinging on the subject matter from the brass, such a claim seems realistic. And since we've just mentioned it, let's take a closer look at the engine too, because actually the block stuffed into a JLTV is the exact same thing as you'd find in this and this General Motors' venerable Duramax V8. Notice how we said the same block though, because thanks to Gale Banks engineering, it's a Duramax on steroids. All the polar bear friendly ecosystems you have to have on yours, particular filters and EGR valves that choke power and invariably break, sending an otherwise perfectly serviceable car to the scrap heap, all gone. The injectors, higher pressure to shove even more bang juice into the cylinders, and said bang juice, according to a 722-page instructor's guide that we found stored on a random server, and we aren't entirely sure we were meant to be able to see. All diesel fuels available in the military, including, interestingly, JP8, which is very close to being aviation kerosene. Further, whereas civilian Duramaxes rely on a single serpentine belt, the JLTV version spreads the load across 3 belts, one for the alternator, one for the hydraulic pump, and one for the fan and air conditioning. This affords it a degree of redundancy, as losing one won't necessarily take it off the road. So yeah, it's a Duramax, but only technically, really. And then we get to survivability. The crew pod is a proper armored capsule with an underbody shaped to deflect blast and a floor designed to soak up energy, just like an MRAP. The seats are suspended and fitted with restraints so that when the worst happens, the soldiers aren't smashed against the roof or turned into projectiles themselves. Fire suppression is automatic, rollover protection is built in, and the whole lot can be scaled up with bolt and armor kits depending on the threat level. Base protection, the so-called A kit, shrugs off rifle fire, small mines, and shell fragments, while the add-on protection, the B kit, is rated up to 7.62 by 51mm AP rounds and larger mines. And then there are the little things, the soldier-driven tweaks that sound trivial until you realize how much they matter. Rear window made larger so the guys in the back can actually see what's happening around them, a decent exhaust to enhance stealthiness, a redesigned troop seat kit in the cargo bay for more flexible carrying options, and a trailer designed to match the vehicle's off-road pace rather than the lumbering anchors sold soldiers were used to. Each fix came directly from feedback in testing, and they've all been baked into production. All of this, from suspension to armor, is wrapped in a package sized to move with the Force. Airlift was mandatory. Sling loads under Chinooks and King Stallions, pairs inside a C-130, and as many as one can cram in a C-17. The Marines demanded compatibility with the low decks of their pre-positioning ships too, so the designers shaved the roofline until the truck could squeeze in without a fight. So yeah, it might just look like just another armored truck, but in reality, it's a carefully tuned compromise of speed, survivability, and future-proofing. A machine designed not just to get soldiers into the fight, but to make sure they come back out again. Operational deployment and evaluation. Alright, so let's pick up the narrative part of our episode today, back in January 2019, where, after 13 long years of development, the JLTV finally entered service. And, well, straight away there were issues. You see, Director Operational Test and Evaluation, the Department of Defense's independent testing watchdog, was not happy, at least in part. They loved 3 of the 4 configurations, with the general purpose, heavy weapons carrier, and utility configurations all being judged operationally effective for tactical employment with minimal quibble. But the close combat weapons carrier, that was not. Compared to the old tow-armed Humvees, it was found that its tank-killing routine, how quickly it could get off aimed shots, was slow and awkward, especially in regards to reloading. There were also issues with the base variants that those configurations were plonked onto, with none of them being deemed as operationally suitable, with the lead issues being reliability, maintainability, crew situational awareness, and safety, so basically everything. Oshkosh took it all in their stride, however, and pressed on. In April, they got the Army to run a soldier demonstration where the prototype kit is given over to real troops for use in real field conditions, and asked them to be honest. The feedback produced what became known as the Big Four improvements. Enlarge the rear window so the backseaters can see, add a forward-facing camera for the driver, fit a better muffler so the truck doesn't broadcast its arrival, and treat the trailer and troop seats like integral kit, not improvisations. By the 22nd of March, those decisions had formal buy-in, and the Army's acquisition leadership moved the program towards full-rate production, with those changes baked in, with the decision for full-rate production coming on June the 20th. Production chugged along quite nicely from there too. The Marine Corps hit initial operational capability late that summer, and the Army, which was after way more of them, was scheduling to hit the same stage by May 2020, with the 1st Armoured Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart being tagged as the first unit equipped. And from there, the story was a simple one. Produce, 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 as Oshkosh steadily cranked up output from a few hundred low-rate trucks a year into the thousands, feeding both the Army's heavy brigades and the Marine Corps' infantry battalions in parallel. By the end of 2020, vehicles were rolling into multiple divisions. By 2021, the program had crossed the 10,000 delivered mark, and by 2023 to 2024, the tally was north of 20,000, with JLTVs no longer a curiosity, but a common sight in motorballs from Georgia to Camp Pendleton. As for the total number that are to be procured, the Army's program of record called for nearly 50,000, with the Marines wanting another 12,500, plus smaller orders still for the Air Force and Navy, bringing the total US appetite to somewhere in the region of 65,000 all told, and that's according to a selected acquisition report from back in 2021. They aren't all going to be being produced in Oshkosh either, because in February 2023, after the company had produced somewhere in the region of 22,000 units, the Army played its trap card. It had bought the technical data package, basically a complete blueprint for a piece of military equipment, rights included for the JLTV, and so it could shop around for a better deal. And that deal, ironically, would be found with AM General, the original manufacturer of the Humvee, and has options for as many as 20,682 units spread across a 5-year base deal and 5 further 1-year options. And if you're wondering how much all of this has cost, as of 2023, by the Pentagon's own selected acquisition records, the total cost of the JLTV program was then sitting at around $37 billion, covering research and development, procurement of the trucks themselves, and all the gubbins that accompanies them. The exact same report also made a lifetime program cost estimate of $88 billion. But what is a billion? I mean, it's a number so big we can't really properly comprehend it, so let's consider the price per unit instead. The best figure comes from 2015, when it was placed at $371,000 per JLTV delivered, which, adjusted for inflation, comes out at a Big Mac meal over $432,000. And while that's certainly an eye-wateringly large amount of money to us, in the grand scheme of military procurement, it could be worse. For example, the British Foxhound, an infantry mobility vehicle with MRAP capabilities, comes in at $1.5 million a pop, despite being ever so smaller than the JLTV. Similarly, the Hawkeye from Australia pushes $1 million too, despite being even smaller still. So the JLTV, by international standards, is actually not that bad price-wise. International adoption and comparison with peer vehicles. And speaking of other countries, that segues us nicely into discussing the JLTV's export success, which ain't too shabby. Lithuania was the first European customer to take the plunge, signing for 200 vehicles in 2019 and following it up with another 300 in 2022, bringing their total to a neat 500. Lithuanians have been clear about why they're all about the JLTV too. They wanted survivable mobility for their scouts, artillery observers, and light infantry, something that could keep up with maneuver units and still give crews a fighting chance should the tactical situation get a bit whoopsie-daisy, i.e. exactly what the JLTV was designed for. Belgium did something a bit different though, as rather than simply buying their JLTVs off the shelf a la Lithuania, they had all but 20 tailored into a new command and liaison vehicle, which they dubbed the Falcon, with those 20 being ordered as dedicated battlefield ambulances. They got 322 vehicles in all, the first of which arrived in 2024. Weapons, however, were to be indigenous, with FN Herstal supplying their Defender light weapon station, the FN of which is capitalized because who says arms manufacturers can't have a sense of humor? Further south, Slovenia has become one of the more inventive adopters, having ordered 129 vehicles. It has some fitted with the Konsberg remote weapon stations capable of firing Spike anti-tank missiles. That makes theirs into something more potent than just a taxi for infantry. Now, they're mobile tank killers that can keep up with mechanized units and then slip back into a patrol role afterwards. Montenegro's story, perhaps unsurprisingly, as they aren't exactly what you'd call a G7 nation by either wealth or population, is smaller. The tiny Balkan state ordered 67 vehicles in total and was among the first European customers to actually take delivery, with the first handful arriving in 2020. For a country that size, fielding NATO standard light armor is a big step up, and the JLTVs are now central to 2 infantry companies that Montenegro declares to the alliance. They've even been paired with Israeli remote weapon stations and, in a few cases, 120mm soft recoil mortars. North Macedonia has followed a similar path, ordering 71 vehicles with a mix of general-purpose heavy gun carrier and close combat weapons carrier variants, and with approval granted for another 25 on top of that. Romania, meanwhile, has focused squarely on the heavy gun carrier configuration, with 129 of those cleared for sale. For both countries, the attraction is simple: to field units that look, train, and deploy like their American and Western European counterparts without reinventing the wheel. Further west, the Netherlands has pushed the design into new territory. In April 2025, it ordered 150 Caimans, as they call them in their service, a type that rather unusually is to be an unarmored patrol version for use with its Marine Corps, with high fording ability and a design meant to work seamlessly in amphibious landings. Outside of Europe, Israel became an early customer too, ordering 75 through foreign military sales in 2023, with dozens more through a direct deal. For Oshkosh, the significance was more than just another export win, though, as Israel's orders kept their production lines busy, just as the US Army them off for AM General. Even further afield, Brazil has dipped in as well. Its Marine Corps ordered 12 vehicles under the Prosumus modernization plan, with Prosumus standing for something. George, who wrote this, I'm not going to try and pronounce that in Portuguese, my dude. Not a geopolitics redefining complement of vehicles, sure, but the Brazilians knew what they wanted. A light, survivable, air-portable truck that can operate seamlessly with their US partners. And so, for them, JLTV ticked the right boxes, even if their fleet is modest. And there's more to come too. Slovakia has approval for up to 192 vehicles. Canada has a cleared case for 60, and other NATO and partner states have quietly explored similar buys. Put it all together, and what emerges is a steady pattern of adoption. Countries that train and fight alongside the US are gravitating to the same light truck because it simplifies life in coalition operations, and frankly, it ain't that bad from the value angle either. But of course, not everyone has gone the same way. The British Army studied JLTV for its multi-role vehicle protected program, but walked away, citing affordability, and cancelled the program outright. Instead, it is just sticking with its foxhounds, and we know full well just how expensive those things were. Similarly, Italy has continued with its own Iveco LMV and upgraded LMV2, and Germany and Switzerland favour the GDELS Eagle. Conclusion. Ultimately, across nearly a century, the US military's light vehicles have mirrored the wars they were built to fight. The Jeep embodied World War II's need for simplicity and ubiquity. The Humvees captured the late Cold War ideal of mobility and versatility. MRAPs were desperate to answer the roadside bombs of Iraq and Afghanistan, towering fortresses on wheels that could keep soldiers alive even in the deadliest ambushes. But each was a product of its moment, and each, eventually, revealed its limits. The JLTV is different. It was not rushed into service as a stopgap, nor built around outdated assumptions. Instead, it was designed deliberately to bridge a painful gap, to carry troops through the firestorms of modern combat without sacrificing speed, maneuverability, or long-term adaptability. In short, it is not just a partial replacement for the Humvee, it is a reinvention of what a light military vehicle can be. Will it be perfect? No, as no vehicle ever is. But in the JLTV, America and its partners have finally found a balance long missing. And for the soldiers who will drive them into danger, that balance may spell the difference between coming home or not coming home at all. Thank you for watching.